The tent is silent, except for the scratch of reed on papyrus. Outside, somewhere in the darkness beyond the canvas walls, 10,000 legionaries sleep in their winter quarters along the frozen Danube. Inside, lamplight flickers across the face of the most powerful man on earth as he writes words no one else will ever read. It is the winter of 175 CE. Marcus Aurelius, Antoninus Augustus, Emperor of Rome, commander of its armies, high priest of its gods, is 54 years old. He has ruled for 14 years. For 8 of those years he has been at war on this frontier, watching men die of Germanic spears and invisible plague, watching the empire he inherited crack under pressures he cannot control. Tonight he is writing in Greek, the language of philosophy, not Latin. The language of power, he is writing reminders to himself. Instructions. Confessions. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. He writes this because he does not believe it, not fully, not tonight. If he believed it, he would not need to write it down. The meditations, as we now call them, are not wisdom dispensed to disciples. They are desperate notes from a man trying to convince himself that his philosophy works, that duty can be borne, that meaning persists even when everything falls apart. They are the private thoughts of someone the world believed had achieved perfect tranquility, revealing that he was, in fact, barely holding on. The reed scratches against papyrus with a sound like dried leaves across stone. Marcus pauses, dips the stylus again into the ink pot. His fingers are stained black from months of this nightly ritual. Outside, a sentry calls the watch, 3rd hour of the night. The brazier in the corner throws shadows that dance and retreat across the tent walls. He can hear his own breathing, labored, painful. His chest has hurt for weeks now. The physicians gave him theriac, that ancient cure-all of crushed vipers and opium, honey and herbs. It dulls the pain. It also dulls everything else. But tonight he needs to think clearly, so he has taken only enough to keep functioning. He looks down at what he has written. The same lesson, phrased differently than yesterday, differently than last week. How many times must he remind himself of the same truth before it becomes automatic? How many nights must he sit here, alone with his failures, trying to reconstruct his philosophy piece by piece? Tomorrow, men will die at his command. Some of them Roman, most of them Germanic tribesmen who crossed the river seeking land or plunder or escape from their own pressures. The philosophers say death is natural, nothing to fear. They do not say that killing is good, only sometimes necessary. Marcus must live in that distinction. He must order deaths while believing death is merely a transformation, must command violence while practicing gentleness, must be emperor while wanting to be anything else. Marcus Aurelius is remembered as the philosopher-king, the last good emperor of Rome, the sage who ruled with wisdom and died with grace. His notebooks became one of the most influential texts in Western civilization, studied by everyone from Frederick the Great to Bill Clinton, quoted in corporate boardrooms and military academies, repurposed as self-help manuals and leadership guides. We imagine him serene, composed, dispensing ancient wisdom while managing an empire, but the man writing in that tent is not serene. He is exhausted, his chest hurts, he cannot sleep. He has just learned that one of his most trusted generals attempted to seize power, believing Marcus was dead, and Marcus ordered the man hunted down even while writing in his notebook about forgiveness. Tomorrow he will rise before dawn and put on his armor and ride out to inspect fortifications built to hold back peoples Rome once considered barbarians unworthy of attention, peoples who now threaten the empire's existence. He will do this because it is his duty. He has been doing his duty since he was 17 years old, when the Emperor Hadrian looked at him and decided he would rule the world. He never wanted this. That is the secret the meditations reveal. Marcus Aurelius spent his entire life preparing to be emperor, and his entire reign wishing he could be anything else. Before we go further into his story, I want to ask something of you. If what you're about to hear resonates with you, if you find yourself pulled into this journey through a life that spans 2,000 years but feels impossibly present, take a moment now to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support makes it possible for me to keep doing this work, to keep finding these stories and bringing them to life. And I'm genuinely curious, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop a comment and let me know. Are you in New York or Mumbai, Sao Paulo or Stockholm? I want to know who's on this journey with me. Now, let us go back to the beginning. To Rome in 121 CE, to a child born into exactly the kind of life that should have made philosophy irrelevant. Marcus Annius Verus is born on April 26th, in the 17th year of Hadrian's reign, in a Rome that has never been more powerful. The empire stretches from Britain to Mesopotamia, from the Rhine to the Sahara. Its legions are undefeated, its economy hums. Its aqueducts bring water from mountains 50 miles away to public fountains, where citizens drink for free. This is Rome at its zenith, and Marcus is born near the top of its hierarchy. His family is rich, not merely wealthy, but genuinely rich, the kind of rich that owns tile factories and sprawling estates, that has held consulships for 3 generations. His paternal grandfather, also named Marcus Annius Verus, has been consul 3 times, one of the most distinguished men in Rome. His mother, Domitia Lucilla, is an heiress who inherited industrial operations that supply building materials for the capital's endless construction. When Marcus is born, his family lives on the Caelian Hill, in a house large enough that we would call it a mansion, small enough that we would still call it a home. The house is built in the old Republican style, arranged around a central atrium where rainwater collects in a marble pool. Morning light filters through the opening in the roof, illuminating the imagines, the death masks of ancestors displayed in niches along the walls. These are not decorations. They are witnesses, reminders of duty and lineage, the weight of family expectation rendered in wax and painted wood. The child Marcus grows up walking past these faces every day, these silent judges of his worthiness. The household runs with the efficiency that wealth enables. There are slaves, of course, dozens of them, performing every function from cooking to copying manuscripts. In the kitchen, bread bakes in ovens fed with wood brought from estates outside the city. In the library, scribes copy Greek and Latin texts that Marcus's family collects the way other families collect silver plate. The floors are mosaic, depicting scenes from Homer. The walls are painted with mythological scenes in red and gold and blue. It is a house designed to demonstrate culture, to announce that its inhabitants are not merely rich, but educated, not merely powerful, but refined. But when Marcus is 3 years old, his father dies. We do not know how. Ancient sources do not consider the death of a praetor noteworthy enough to record its cause. One day Marcus has a father, then he does not. There is a funeral, of course. The body is carried through the streets in procession, accompanied by mourners wearing the masks of ancestors, a parade of the dead, honoring the newly dead. The body is cremated outside the city walls as law requires. The ashes are placed in an urn, interred in the family tomb along the Via Appia, where all distinguished families keep their dead. Marcus is too young to understand what has happened. He knows his father is gone. He does not yet understand that gone means forever, that the structure of his world has fundamentally changed. He will understand later. He will understand that security is temporary, that the people you love can vanish, that the world is not solid, but contingent. This knowledge will shape everything that follows. He is raised by his grandfather and his mother, surrounded by wealth and expectation, but marked by absence. This is important. Every life has a wound at its center, a fundamental condition that shapes everything that follows. For Marcus, it is this: the knowledge that security is temporary, that the people you love can vanish, that the structure of the world you inhabit is not as solid as it appears. His grandfather becomes his true father, and his grandfather is a serious man. Marcus Annius Verus the Elder has served Rome for decades, held the consulship 3 times, governed provinces, advised emperors. He is respected, dignified, severe. He believes in the old virtues, gravitas, pietas, disciplina. He believes that public service is the highest calling, that a man of his station owes Rome his best efforts, that duty is not negotiable. The boy Marcus absorbs these lessons. He watches his grandfather conduct business in the tablinum, the household office where clients come seeking favors and influence. He watches his grandfather dictate letters to secretaries, manage estates, adjudicate disputes. This is what power looks like in practice, not dramatic gestures but patient administration, not glory but responsibility. His grandfather rarely praises him. Praise is not the point. The point is to do what is expected because it is expected. Marcus grows up in a house where public service is assumed, where holding office is not ambition but duty, where the values of old Rome, austere and disciplined, still govern daily life. He is educated by tutors as befits his station. He learns Latin and Greek, rhetoric and literature. He reads Homer and Virgil, Plato and Cicero. He is bright. Everyone can see this. He has a gift for absorbing knowledge, for understanding complex arguments, for speaking precisely. His tutors are impressed. The boy has a mind like a sharpened blade, they tell his grandfather. He remembers everything, questions everything, synthesizes ideas with a maturity beyond his years. He excels at grammar, at rhetoric, at mathematics. He recites Homer from memory, all 24 books of the Iliad, the Greek rolling off his tongue with perfect meter. He reads Virgil and understands not just the story, but the structure, the way Virgil built his epic on Homer's foundation while transforming it into something distinctly Roman. But something happens when Marcus is 11 or 12 years old, something the sources record with a mixture of admiration and bemusement. The boy develops an obsession with philosophy, specifically with Stoicism, and begins to act it out with an intensity that alarms his family. It starts with a tutor named Diognetus, a painter hired to teach Marcus art. But Diognetus is also a Stoic, a practitioner of the philosophy, not just a student of it. He lives simply, dresses plainly, speaks directly. He tells Marcus that philosophy is not a subject to study but a way of life, that wisdom is not accumulation of knowledge but transformation of character. Marcus, 11 years old, takes this seriously. He starts wearing rough clothes instead of the fine tunics appropriate to his station. The expensive fabrics his mother selects, the embroidered hems, the soft wool dyed in expensive colors, he refuses them. He wants the plain, coarse tunic that laborers wear, the kind that scratches the skin. His mother is horrified. What will people think? That her son, grandson of a 3-time consul, dresses like a slave. But Marcus insists he is not playing at asceticism. He believes in it. The Stoics teach that external things, wealth and comfort and status, are indifferent, neither good nor evil. Only virtue matters, only character. If he is to be a philosopher, he must live like one. So he wears rough clothes and insists on sleeping on the ground with only a thin mat, rejecting his comfortable bed with its soft mattresses and warm blankets. His mother begs him. "The stone floors are cold," she says. "You will get sick. At least use a mat with animal skins for warmth." Marcus compromises, but reluctantly. He is trying to practice what the philosophers teach about indifference to physical comfort, about distinguishing what is in one's power from what is not. The body wants comfort, that is its nature. But the mind should not be controlled by the body's wants. The mind should be free. This is not normal behavior for a Roman aristocrat's child. Philosophy is meant to be an intellectual ornament, something you study to improve your rhetoric and demonstrate your education. Young men of Marcus's class learn philosophy the way they learn music or athletics as part of a well-rounded education. It is not supposed to make you sleep on the floor. It is not supposed to change how you live. Marcus's family is concerned. His grandfather watches this development with a mixture of pride and worry. The boy's seriousness is admirable. His commitment is concerning. They arrange for him to study with the best teachers, hoping that proper instruction will moderate his enthusiasm, will channel this intensity into something more appropriate for his station. Instead, the teachers make it worse. Marcus encounters real philosophers, men who live according to Stoic principles, and he becomes even more devoted. He studies with Apollonius of Chalcedon, who teaches him that Stoicism demands complete transformation, that you cannot practice philosophy halfway. Either you commit to virtue as the only good, or you do not understand what virtue means. He studies with Quintus Junius Rusticus, a senator and consul, who introduces him to the discourses of Epictetus. Epictetus was born a slave, crippled, owned by Nero's secretary. He gained his freedom somehow and became a philosopher, teaching in Rome until Domitian expelled all philosophers from the city. He moved to Greece and taught there until his death. His lectures were transcribed by a student and survive as the discourses, dense philosophical arguments about freedom and acceptance. The paradox at the heart of Epictetus's teaching is this: the slave was free in the only way that matters because he controlled his mind, and the emperor was enslaved to his desires and fears. Marcus reads Epictetus, and something clicks into place. Here is a man who had nothing, who was owned by others, who suffered pain and humiliation, and who remained free because freedom is internal. Here is proof that philosophy works, that the mind can be independent of circumstances, that virtue does not require wealth or power or comfort. If a slave can be free, then an aristocrat's child has no excuse for being enslaved to luxury. This is Marcus at 12, 13, 14, a boy sleeping on the floor, wearing rough clothes, reading philosophy with an intensity that frightens his family because they sense he actually believes it, that this is not a phase but a transformation. They do not yet understand that they are watching someone construct the intellectual framework that will allow him to survive 40 years of duty he does not want. Then, in 136 CE, when Marcus is 15, something happens that changes everything. The Emperor Hadrian notices him. Hadrian is 60 years old, has no children, and is dying. He has spent his reign traveling the empire, building walls and cities, collecting art and lovers, demonstrating that an emperor can be both soldier and aesthete, administrator and intellectual. He has also spent years trying to solve the problem of succession. Rome's solution to this problem is adoption. The emperor adopts a capable adult man as his son and heir, ensuring continuity without the genetic lottery of biological inheritance. This system has given Rome a century of competent rulers, from Nerva to Trajan to Hadrian himself. Each emperor has chosen his successor based on merit, or at least on judgment of character and capability. It is a system that works when the emperor has the wisdom to choose well and the courage to choose someone who might be better than himself. But Hadrian is running out of time. His first choice, Lucius Aelius Caesar, was adopted in 136 but died suddenly in 138 before Hadrian could. Hadrian needs another successor, needs one quickly, and he is watching the children of the aristocracy with calculating eyes. He sees Marcus. We do not know what he sees. Perhaps the boy's obvious intelligence, that sharp mind the tutors praise. Perhaps his seriousness, so unusual in an aristocratic youth who should be interested in horses and girls and gladiatorial games. Perhaps something more ineffable, a quality of character that suggests this child might grow into a man capable of ruling the world with both strength and wisdom. Perhaps Hadrian recognizes in Marcus something of himself, the intellectual curiosity, the capacity for sustained effort, the ability to perform duty while maintaining inner life. Whatever Hadrian sees, he acts on it. He enrolls Marcus in the equestrian order, the second tier of Roman aristocracy. He makes him a priest of the Salia, one of the oldest religious fraternities in Rome, whose members perform ancient rituals wearing archaic armor and carrying sacred shields. It is a position of considerable prestige, and it signals imperial favor. People notice. Marcus is marked, but Hadrian does not adopt Marcus directly. Marcus is too young, only 15, not ready to be emperor. The empire cannot afford an adolescent ruler. Instead, Hadrian makes a more complex arrangement. This is where Hadrian's political genius emerges. On February 25, 138 CE, Hadrian adopts a man named Antoninus. Titus Aurelius Fulvus, Boionius, Arrius Antoninus, is 51 years old, a senator, has served as consul and governed provinces. He is competent, respected, boring. He has no military glory, no dramatic achievements, no burning ambitions. He is exactly the kind of safe choice that makes sense for a stable transition. But Hadrian makes the adoption conditional. Antoninus must adopt 2 boys, Marcus, now 17, and Lucius Verus, aged 7. Lucius is the son of Hadrian's first adopted heir, Aelius, the one who died. Hadrian is hedging his bets, providing backup options, ensuring continuity for a generation. The message is clear. Antoninus will rule. Marcus will succeed him. And if something happens to Marcus, Lucius provides another option. Marcus's life changes overnight. At 17, he is suddenly Caesar, heir to the throne, second most important person in the empire. His betrothal to Saonia Fabia, daughter of Aelius, is broken off. The engagement was arranged when her father was heir. Now her father is dead, and the political calculation has changed. Instead, Marcus is betrothed to Faustina, Antoninus's daughter. The marriage will wait until she is old enough, but the arrangement is made. Marcus will marry into the imperial family. The succession is secured. He moves into the imperial residence on the Palatine Hill. The house on the Caelian, the home of his childhood, is now behind him. He lives now in the palace complex that has grown over generations, room added to room, building connected to building, until the hill is more architecture than earth. He has his own apartments, his own staff, his own guards. He attends Senate meetings, sitting in the section reserved for imperial family. He watches his adoptive father conduct business, observing how emperors govern. And here is the first great contradiction of Marcus Aurelius's life. He is a Stoic philosopher who believes that external things, wealth and power and status, are neither good nor evil, merely indifferent. The only true good is virtue, the quality of one's character and choices. External circumstances should not affect the wise man's tranquility, but Marcus's external circumstances have just made him the most privileged person in the world, and he cannot refuse them without abandoning the very duty his philosophy tells him is paramount. He must accept his fate while knowing that his fate is something billions of humans would kill for, and that he would rather be left alone to study.
This is the contradiction he will live with for the rest of his life, that Stoicism teaches indifference to externals while he possesses more external goods than almost anyone in human history, that philosophy promises freedom while his duty chains him to obligations he cannot escape. He studies anyway. He finds teachers, real philosophers, not the rhetoricians who teach aristocrats to speak beautifully about nothing. He continues his work with Rusticus, who becomes not just teacher, but friend, the older man guiding the younger through the practical application of Stoic principles. Rusticus is senator, philosopher, and living example of how to hold public office while maintaining philosophical integrity. He shows Marcus that it is possible to serve Rome and pursue wisdom, though the balance is difficult and the cost is high. He studies with Apollonius of Chalcedon, who teaches him that Stoicism is not a set of clever arguments, but a way of living, that every moment is an opportunity to practice virtue, that philosophy is tested not in the classroom, but in the forum, not in abstract discussions, but in concrete decisions. Apollonius teaches him to examine his impressions, to distinguish what is in his power from what is not, to accept what cannot be changed while changing what can be. He studies with Sextus of Chaeronea, grandson of Plutarch, who teaches him about kindness and gentleness, about treating others with understanding rather than judgment. From Sextus he learns that Stoicism should make you more compassionate, not less, that understanding that people act according to their nature should produce not anger but patience. Everyone is doing the best they can with the understanding they have. To be angry at someone for ignorance makes as much sense as being angry at rain for falling. Marcus is learning that philosophy is not theory, it is practice. It is what you do when you wake up and face the day and encounter people who frustrate you and deal with events that frighten you. Philosophy is the art of living, and Marcus is being trained to live in a way that almost no one else must, as emperor. And he learns from his adoptive father, Antoninus, in ways that go deeper than any formal instruction. For 23 years he prepares. Antoninus Pius becomes emperor in 138 CE and rules with steady competence, holding together the vast machine of Roman administration, maintaining the frontiers, adjudicating disputes, attending to the 10,000 details that keep an empire functioning. Marcus watches. He serves as consul in 140 and again in 145. He marries Faustina in 145, a marriage arranged for dynastic reasons that will nevertheless last 30 years and produce some 13 children, most of whom will die young. Faustina is younger than Marcus by about 4 years, daughter of the emperor. Beautiful by the standards recorded in sculpture and coins. But what is she like as a person? The sources tell us almost nothing useful. Later historians, writing long after her death, circulate rumors about infidelity and scandal. These rumors are almost certainly false, or at least exaggerated products of the historical tendency to blame women for men's failures. What we can say with certainty is that she and Marcus remain married until her death, that he grieves genuinely when she dies, that their children are his and raised in the imperial household. The marriage is not romantic in the modern sense. It cannot be. It is dynastic, political, arranged. But perhaps there is affection, perhaps there is something like partnership. Marcus will write in his Meditations about accepting the people in your life as they are, about not demanding that family members be different than their nature allows. He will write about patience and forgiveness and the understanding that we are all part of a universal brotherhood. Perhaps he is writing about Faustina. Perhaps he is writing about the difficulty of loving someone you did not choose, but to whom you are bound by duty and proximity and the shared project of raising children in impossible circumstances. Their first child, a daughter, is born in 146. They name her Domitia Faustina. More children follow, almost one per year. Twins in 149, though one dies in infancy.
another daughter in 150 May, another in 151, twin sons in 152, both dead within a few years. The childbearing is relentless, dangerous, exhausting. Faustina risks death with each pregnancy, as all women do in an age before modern medicine. And Marcus watches children die again and again, the tiny bodies cremated, the ashes interred in imperial tombs. He is learning, in the most visceral way possible, that death is natural, that nothing lasts, that attachment leads to grief. In 161 CE, Faustina gives birth to twin sons again. One is named Commodus, the other, Antoninus, dies at age 4. Commodus survives. This survival will matter more than anything else Marcus does. But we are ahead of ourselves. Marcus is still Caesar, still preparing, still watching his adoptive father govern. He receives tribunician power in 147, giving him legal authority second only to the emperor. He shares the consulship with Antoninus in 161. He is being groomed methodically and completely to rule. Every major decision, every administrative challenge, every crisis that arises, Marcus is included in the discussion. Antoninus is teaching him not through formal lessons, but through inclusion, through showing Marcus how to think about governance. But something unexpected happens during these decades of preparation. Marcus and Antoninus develop genuine affection for each other. Antoninus is not Marcus's biological father, not his grandfather, not connected to him by blood at all. He is an administrator, chosen by a dying emperor to fill a political need, but he becomes Marcus's true father in a way that goes beyond duty. Antoninus is patient. When Marcus makes mistakes, and he does, Antoninus corrects him gently, explaining rather than rebuking. When Marcus is frustrated, Antoninus listens. When Marcus is overwhelmed by the complexity of administration, Antoninus breaks problems down into manageable pieces. Antoninus is kind without being weak, firm without being harsh. He shows Marcus that power does not require cruelty, that you can be strong and gentle, that the emperor serves Rome, not the reverse. Marcus watches how Antoninus handles the Senate, that gathering of aristocrats who technically advise the emperor, but actually have little power. The Senate could be ignored, ruled through fear and intimidation. Many emperors have done this, but Antoninus treats them with respect, asks their opinions, listens to their concerns. He does not always follow their advice, but he makes them feel heard. This is wisdom, recognizing that governance requires consent, that even absolute power functions better when people believe their voices matter. He watches how Antoninus deals with provincial governors, those representatives of Roman power scattered across the empire from Britain to Egypt. Governors can become corrupt, can abuse their power, can enrich themselves at local populations' expense. Antoninus monitors them carefully, replaces those who fail, promotes those who succeed. He reads reports, asks questions, follows up. The work is tedious, unglamorous, essential. Marcus learns that empire is not dramatic gestures, but patient administration. He watches how Antoninus manages the imperial household, that complex network of slaves and freedmen and aristocrats who operate the machinery of central government. There are secretaries who handle correspondence, treasury officials who manage finances, legal advisors who draft legislation, chamberlains who control access to the emperor. These people have immense power because they control information flow. Antoninus navigates this system carefully, trusting some, monitoring others, maintaining enough distance to preserve authority, while showing enough warmth to inspire loyalty. And Marcus watches how Antoninus lives. The emperor does not indulge in luxury beyond what ceremony requires. He eats simply, dresses plainly, when not performing official duties, maintains regular habits. He rises early, works late, takes time for exercise and reading, but does not waste time on frivolous entertainments.
He is the same in private as in public, steady, reliable, calm. This is the lesson Marcus absorbs most deeply. That character is not performance but consistency. That virtue is who you are when no one is watching. In the first book of the Meditations, written decades later, Marcus will list the things he learned from the people who shaped him. The section on Antoninus is the longest, a detailed catalogue of virtues observed over 23 years. From Antoninus, Marcus writes, he learned mildness of temper and firm resolution in decisions arrived at after careful investigation. He learned to ignore empty honours and to work tirelessly without complaint. He learned to listen to anyone who had something useful to contribute, giving each person their due without flattery or condescension. He learned when to tighten discipline and when to relax it, how to maintain friendships without becoming burdensome, how to be self-sufficient without being isolated. He learned to plan ahead but remain flexible, to maintain principles without being stubborn, to accept honours graciously but treat them as indifferent. He learned to handle illness without complaint, to maintain good humour without forcing it, to be cheerful without being frivolous. He learned that a ruler should be like a promontory against which waves crash continuously and the ruler stands firm while the sea around him eventually calms. From Antoninus he learned what it means to be genuinely equal to the task of ruling, to live without pretense, to care for every citizen as a father cares for his children. He learned that an emperor could be both powerful and humble, that ruling required not grandeur but patience, not brilliance but steadiness, not control but service. This is Marcus's education in reality. Philosophy taught him principles, Antoninus teaches him application, and in 161 CE, after 23 years of preparation, after growing from an adolescent sleeping on the floor into a man of 40 with a family and responsibilities and deep exhaustion, Marcus Aurelius becomes Emperor of Rome. Antoninus Pius dies on March 7, 161, aged 74. The end comes suddenly. He is at his estate in Lorium, northwest of Rome, when he falls ill. A fever, perhaps, or stroke. His condition deteriorates rapidly. Marcus is summoned. He rushes from Rome to his father's bedside, arriving in time to witness the final hours. Antoninus is conscious, still himself but fading. He gives instructions, settles final matters of state. He commends Marcus to the household and the guard. He tells the tribune of the watch to give the day's password. The password is equanimitas, equanimity, calm acceptance. It is Antoninus's final teaching, his last lesson to Marcus about how to rule and how to die. Then Antoninus turns to his side, as if going to sleep, and stops breathing. He dies quietly, without struggle or drama, the way he lived. Marcus watches his father die and knows that the weight has now transferred completely to him. There is no one left to share it with. He is emperor. The Senate immediately offers Marcus the position of Augustus, supreme ruler. This is formality. The succession has been planned for decades. Marcus accepts, but he does something unprecedented. He insists that Lucius Verus, his adoptive brother, be elevated to equal rank. Rome will have 2 Augusti, 2 emperors with identical legal authority. This has never happened before. Rome has had co-rulers in practice, periods when an emperor shared power with a son or colleague, but never 2 men with exactly equal constitutional authority, both holding the title of Augustus, both theoretically capable of making any decision without consulting the other. The Senate is confused. Some senators worry this will lead to conflict, that divided authority will produce paralysis or civil war. Why would Marcus share power? What is he thinking? The cynical interpretation is that Marcus wants someone else to handle military affairs, that he is creating a division of labor. Marcus is 40, intellectual, philosophical, has never commanded armies. Lucius is 31, energetic, fond of luxury, but physically capable, connected to the military, through his father Aelius, who was Hadrian's first choice. Perhaps Marcus is delegating the aspects of rule he finds distasteful. The generous interpretation is that Marcus genuinely believes in Stoic brotherhood, that he sees Lucius as partner rather than subordinate, that he wants to honor Hadrian's original plan of making both boys part of the succession. Perhaps Marcus is trying to embody the philosophical principle that all rational beings are equal in essence, that power is responsibility rather than privilege, that sharing burden is wisdom rather than weakness. The truth is probably simpler and darker. Marcus does not want to be emperor at all. He is trying to dilute the burden, to make it somehow more bearable by splitting it. He has spent 23 years preparing for this moment, and now that it has arrived, he wishes desperately that it had not. By making Lucius co-emperor, he is trying to preserve some space for himself, some possibility that he will not be completely consumed by duty. It is a futile hope, but it is human. Lucius accepts the position. How could he not? He is being offered power beyond most people's dreams. The arrangement is formalized. Rome has 2 emperors. Coins are minted showing both their faces. Official documents bear both their names. The system, strange as it is, begins to function. For a few months, there is peace. Marcus and Lucius share duties, attend Senate meetings together, make joint decisions about administration. They work from the palace complex on the Palatine, meeting with advisors, reading reports, handling the endless details of governing an empire that stretches across 3 continents. Perhaps it could work. Perhaps the unprecedented arrangement could stabilize into routine. But the universe does not care about Marcus's preferences. The universe has plans for him, and they are not gentle. Within months of his accession, multiple crises erupt. The Parthian Empire, Rome's great rival in the east, invades Armenia and Syria. In Britain, tribes cross Hadrian's wall. In Germania, the frontier grows unstable. The carefully maintained peace of Antoninus's reign, purchased through diplomacy and deterrence, begins to fracture. The Parthian invasion is the most serious immediate threat. Armenia is a buffer state between Rome and Parthia, nominally independent but practically a Roman client. Parthia's new king, Vologases IV, decides to test Rome's new emperors. His armies invade Armenia, depose the Roman-backed king, install their own candidate. Then they push further, crossing into Syria, defeating the Roman governor's forces, threatening Rome's wealthiest eastern provinces. Rome needs military response, decisive and immediate, but Marcus has never commanded an army in his life. He is a philosopher, not a general. His entire education has been civil administration and intellectual cultivation. He knows Greek literature and Stoic logic. He does not know how to organize legions or plan campaigns or inspire soldiers to march into enemy spears. So Lucius Verus goes east to command the Parthian war. This is the division of labor in practice. Lucius, younger and more inclined toward military glory, will handle the fighting. Marcus will remain in Rome, managing administration, attending to domestic affairs, maintaining the state apparatus. It is a reasonable arrangement. It recognizes each emperor's strengths and divides responsibility accordingly. Lucius departs in 162 CE, taking with him several legions and the best generals Rome has. The journey east is long. The preparations are elaborate. An emperor going to war is not a simple matter. There are ceremonies to perform, sacrifices to make, omens to consult. The augurs examine the entrails of sacrificed animals and pronounce that the gods favor the expedition. Whether Lucius believes this is unclear, whether Marcus believes it is even less clear, but the rituals are required, so they perform them. The war lasts 5 years, from 162 to 166. Marcus remains in Rome, working through reports from the front, making decisions about supplies and reinforcements, managing the empire's other concerns, while Lucius handles military operations. The reports arrive slowly, weeks or months delayed.
carried by courier along the cursus publicus, the imperial postal system that links Rome to even its farthest provinces. The news, when it comes, is mixed. Initial battles go poorly. The Parthians are effective cavalry fighters, mobile and deadly in their own territory. Roman legions, trained for set-piece battles and siege warfare, struggle against enemies who refuse to stand and fight. The Syrian governor's forces suffer embarrassing defeats, but Lucius has brought capable generals, particularly Avidius Cassius, a competent and ruthless commander who understands Eastern warfare. Slowly, methodically, the Romans push back. They retake Armenian territory, defeat Parthian field armies, lay siege to cities. The campaigns are brutal, the kind of warfare that leaves thousands dead and cities burned. Cassius is particularly effective and particularly savage. He does not believe in half measures. Cities that resist are destroyed as examples. Populations that support Parthia are enslaved or massacred. It is effective. It is horrifying. It is war. In 165 CE, Roman armies sack Ctesiphon, the Parthian capital. It is a devastating blow to Parthian prestige, proof that Rome can reach even the heart of its enemy's territory. The city is looted, burned, left in ruins. Thousands die or are enslaved. The Parthian king sues for peace. Rome's eastern frontier is secured. Armenia returns to Roman influence. The war is won. Lucius returns to Rome in triumph, literally. A triumph is Rome's highest military honor, a procession through the city displaying captured enemies and looted treasure, proof of victory. The ceremony is ancient, unchanged for centuries. The victorious general, dressed as Jupiter, rides in a chariot drawn by white horses. Behind him march his soldiers, calling out jokes and insults to prevent their commander from becoming too proud. Behind them come the prisoners, foreign kings and generals in chains. Behind them wagons loaded with gold and silver and precious objects, wealth stripped from defeated enemies. Marcus insists that Lucius share the triumph with him, that both emperors ride together as co-victors. This is generous. Marcus did not fight. He stayed in Rome, managing administration, but he wants to honor Lucius, to demonstrate their partnership. They ride together through cheering crowds, passing under triumphal arches decorated with their images, ascending to the Capitol to sacrifice white bulls to Jupiter. Rome celebrates. The war is won. The empire is secure. But the soldiers return carrying something invisible. They bring back a plague. We do not know what the Antonine Plague was. Modern epidemiologists have suggested smallpox or measles, diseases devastating to populations with no immunity. Ancient descriptions mention fever, lesions, skin eruptions, something that causes visible marking of the body. Whatever it is, it kills with terrifying efficiency. Mortality rates are impossible to establish precisely, but ancient sources suggest that 1 in 4 people in some areas dies, perhaps more. The disease spreads along trade routes and military roads, moving with the efficiency that Roman infrastructure enables. Soldiers carry it home to their garrisons. Merchants carry it along trade routes. Travelers carry it from city to city. The empire's greatest achievement, its network of roads and shipping routes that connects Britain to Egypt, Germania to Syria, becomes the vector for catastrophe. It reaches Rome in 166 CE. At first it is 1 sick person, then 10, then hundreds. The bodies pile up faster than they can be burned. The law requires cremation outside the city walls, but there are too many dead, not enough wood, not enough time. The sick are abandoned in the streets because families cannot care for them without risking infection. The smell of death and smoke hangs over the city. And Marcus, emperor and high priest, must maintain order while watching his capital city die. This is when the full weight of his position becomes clear.
A philosopher can accept mortality, can practice contemplating death, can write elegant notes about the transience of existence. An emperor must deal with actual mass death while maintaining infrastructure and defending borders and projecting confidence. Philosophy does not exempt you from duty. It makes duty harder because you cannot take refuge in ignorance or denial. Marcus knows exactly how powerless he is. He knows that outside events are not in his power, that all he controls is his response. His philosophy tells him this should bring peace. Instead, it brings exhaustion. Every day he must rise, attend to business, make decisions, project stability. Every day the death toll rises. Every day his philosophy is tested against reality. And every day the gap between theory and lived experience grows wider. He watches villages depopulate. Tax revenues decline because there are fewer people to tax. Army units fall below strength because soldiers die and replacements cannot be found. The administrative machinery continues functioning, but it grinds harder, achieving less. And Marcus must respond. He must make decisions about quarantine measures, about funeral arrangements, about maintaining grain supplies when the workers who harvest and transport grain are dying. He cannot fix this. The Stoics teach that some things are in our power and some are not, and disease is clearly not in human power. He can control only his response, steady leadership, rational decisions, maintenance of order. He does this. He works constantly, attending to every detail he can influence while accepting everything beyond his control. And it is not enough. It cannot be enough. The plague kills millions, and Marcus's philosophy offers no comfort except the cold truth that this is nature, that death is inevitable, that grief is irrational, because loss was always certain. In 167 CE, 2 years into the plague, while the empire is still reeling from invisible death, Germanic tribes crossed the Danube in force. This is not a raid. Raids are common along Rome's northern frontier, small groups crossing the river to plunder border settlements before withdrawing. Rome tolerates this as the cost of maintaining a frontier, occasionally launching punitive expeditions but generally accepting that perfect border security is impossible. But this is different. This is a migration, a mass movement of peoples driven by their own pressures, seeking land and safety and wealth in Roman territory. They call themselves Marcomanni, Quadi, Yazyges, and a dozen other names, tribal confederations whose territories lie beyond the Danube. To Rome, they are barbarians, barely civilized, worthy of attention only as potential slaves or threats. But they are people, families, tribes with their own histories and pressures. Something is pushing them south and west, some combination of climate change, resource scarcity, pressure from other tribes further east. They need land. Roman territory has land. So they cross. Roman frontier defenses are formidable but not impregnable. The Danube itself is a barrier, wide and cold and difficult to cross with large groups, but it freezes in winter and determined people can cross ice. Roman forts line the southern bank, legionary bases and auxiliary camps, watchtowers and signal stations. But the garrisons are under strength because of the plague. Entire units have been decimated by disease. The defences hold in some places, crack in others. Germanic warriors pour through the gaps. They are not organised armies, in the Roman sense, no unified command or strategic planning. But they are effective fighters, experienced with weapons, motivated by survival. They raid settlements, besiege fortified towns, overwhelm undermanned garrisons, and they do not withdraw. They bring their families, their possessions, their livestock. They are not raiding, they are settling. Marcus receives reports from the frontier commanders. The reports are alarming. This is not a problem that diplomacy can solve or frontier troops can contain. This requires military response, major response, legionary response. This requires the emperor himself. Marcus must go to the frontier. He must personally command. This is not philosophy. This is war, actual war, the kind that means riding in armor in winter cold, sleeping in military camps, making decisions that result in men dying messily on both sides. Marcus is 46 years old. He has never wanted to be a soldier. He goes anyway. Lucius Verus goes with him. For 2 years, 167 to 169, the two emperors campaigned together on the Danube frontier, trying to restore order. They establish headquarters at Carnuntum, a legionary fortress on the Danube in what is now Austria. From here they direct military operations, coordinate with frontier commanders, plan campaigns. The work is grinding, unglamorous, exhausting. Wars are not the dramatic battles depicted in art, but logistics, administration, the endless details of keeping armies fed and equipped and functional. Marcus learns this directly. He must manage supply chains, ensure that grain and weapons and replacement armor reach the troops. He must adjudicate disputes among officers, make command decisions, review battle plans. He must ride out to inspect fortifications, show himself to the soldiers, perform the role of commander. Even though he has no idea what he is doing, he learns by doing, asking questions, listening to experienced officers. He makes mistakes, but he also makes competent decisions because he is intelligent and careful and willing to defer to expertise. Slowly, the Roman response stabilizes. Legions are reinforced, defensive lines are re-established, the Germanic incursions are contained, though not defeated. It is a war of attrition, grinding and slow. But in January 169, returning from the front, Lucius Verus dies suddenly. They are travelling back toward Rome, perhaps planning to spend time in the capital before returning to campaign. Lucius falls ill on the journey. The ancient sources say stroke. The symptoms they describe, sudden loss of speech and consciousness, suggest either stroke or hemorrhage, or perhaps the plague that is still killing thousands. Whatever the cause, Lucius deteriorates rapidly. Marcus is with him, watching his adoptive brother, his co-emperor, the person who was supposed to share the burden, die. Lucius dies at age 38. His body is cremated, his ashes return to Rome for interment in the mausoleum of Hadrian, that massive circular tomb that houses Rome's imperial dead. The Senate deifies him, adding him to the official pantheon. Marcus mourns publicly, performs the required ceremonies, delivers a funeral oration praising his brother's virtues and achievements, and Marcus realizes he is now alone. The burden he tried to split, the duty he tried to share, is now entirely his. There is no co-emperor, no partner to divide responsibilities. He is sole Augustus, sole ruler of Rome, solely responsible for an empire being torn apart by plague, an invasion, and internal strain. He is 48 years old. He will spend the next 11 years trying to hold everything together, and he will mostly fail, and he will never stop trying. Marcus buries his adoptive brother, performs the required religious ceremonies, and returns to war. For the next 11 years, from 169 to 180, Marcus spends most of his time on the northern frontier. Not in Rome, not in comfort. In military camps along the Danube, commanding armies, directing campaigns, negotiating with tribal leaders, trying to hold together an empire that is being pulled apart by plague and invasion and internal strain. This is the period when he writes the Meditations. Picture this. It is winter, somewhere between 170 and 180 CE. Marcus is in a military camp, probably Carnuntum on the Danube, possibly Vindobona. The accommodations are as comfortable as military headquarters can be, which means better than the soldiers' tents, but still cold, still rough. The tent or wooden structure where he works has a brazier for heat, burning wood or charcoal, smoke vented through a hole in the roof. The floor is wooden planks covered with rugs, insulation against cold rising from the ground. There is a desk, a chair, storage chests for documents and personal belongings. The lamps use oil that smokes, casting flickering light that makes reading and writing difficult. The papyrus is expensive, brought from Egypt along trade routes that the plague has disrupted. Marcus is careful with it, writing small, using both sides of each sheet. He writes at night, when the day's military business is finished, when the camp is quiet except for sentries walking their rounds. He writes in Greek, not Latin. This is significant. Latin is the language of law, of administration, of power. Greek is the language of philosophy, of culture, of the educated elite's intellectual life. By writing in Greek, Marcus is signaling that these notes are not official documents, they are personal, they are for him. If he wanted these thoughts to be public, to be read by others, he would write in Latin, the language of his office. But these are his thoughts, his struggles, his private attempts to maintain sanity and virtue in impossible circumstances. The first entry, or at least the entry that survives first in the manuscripts, begins simply, "From my grandfather Verus." He is starting a list, a catalogue of lessons learned from the people who shaped him. It is not philosophy in the formal sense, not systematic arguments or elegant rhetoric. It is personal accounting, acknowledgement of debt, recognition that who he is results from who taught him. From his grandfather he learned good character and avoiding anger. From his father, or the memory of his father, modesty and manliness. From his mother, piety and generosity and the avoidance of wrongdoing, even in thought. From his great-grandfather, not attending public schools but having good teachers at home. From his tutor, Diognetus, not being absorbed by trivial things. The list continues page after page. From Rusticus he learned not to be led astray by rhetoric, not to spend time writing speculative essays or making idealistic speeches. From Apollonius, freedom of will and unfailing constancy of purpose. From Sextus, kindness and the example of a household governed by paternal affection. From Alexander the grammarian, not finding fault, not correcting people reproachfully. From Fronto, not expecting affection from the great, and then the long section on Antoninus, everything Marcus learned from his adoptive father, written years after Antoninus's death, written with the distance that allows Marcus to see clearly what he was given. The list is detailed, specific, heartbreaking in its recognition that Marcus was taught everything he needed to know, and that knowing is not the same as being able to do. This first book of the Meditations is different from the rest. It is structured, coherent, focused. It is Marcus deliberately remembering his teachers, anchoring himself in gratitude before beginning the difficult work of philosophical practice. The remaining books 2 through 12 are different. They are working notes, repetitive, jumping between topics, documenting daily struggle. And the content is not what you would expect from the ruler of the world. He is not writing about strategy or policy. He is writing reminders to himself about how to get through the day. Wake up early. Do not expect people to be perfect. Remember that everyone you meet is fighting their own struggle. Do not waste time on anger. Accept death because it is natural. Concentrate on what is in your power, which is only your thoughts and choices. Everything else is indifferent. He writes these things because he needs to hear them. Because the gap between philosophical theory and lived reality is so vast that he must constantly remind himself that the theory is supposed to work. He writes, "You have power over your mind, not outside events," because that morning he received a dispatch about a defeat, or a report about courtiers arguing over precedents, or news about another legion decimated by disease, and his immediate response was frustration, anger, despair. The philosophy is true, but applying it is hard, so he writes it down. The meditations are not polished. They repeat themselves constantly. The same ideas appear again and again, phrased slightly differently, as if Marcus is trying different approaches to make the lessons stick. How many times does he remind himself about accepting death, about not being angry, about focusing on what is in his power? Dozens of times, hundreds perhaps. Each repetition is evidence that the previous reminders did not work, or worked temporarily, or need reinforcing because human minds forget and need constant reminding. They jump topics without transition. One entry will be about duty, the next about nature, the next about dealing with annoying people, the next about mortality. There is no systematic progression, no building argument. These are not essays. They are notes, jotted down whenever Marcus has time, whenever something occurs to him that needs recording. They include quotations from other philosophers, snippets of poetry, observations about people he has known. He quotes Epictetus frequently, sometimes accurately, sometimes paraphrasing, sometimes just capturing the sense of a teaching. He references Heraclitus, Plato, other Stoics, poets and playwrights. He is drawing on his entire education, using every tool his teachers gave him, trying to construct a framework that will keep him functional. They are working notes, the philosophical equivalent of an athlete's training log or a musician's practice diary. They document not mastery, but practice. They show the work of trying to be good, not the achievement of goodness. And they reveal that Marcus Aurelius, the man history remembers as the philosopher-king who achieved perfect tranquility, was in fact anxious, frustrated, exhausted, and often barely coping. He reminds himself constantly about accepting death because he is afraid of dying. He reminds himself not to be angry because he is angry. He reminds himself that externals are indifferent because he desperately wants things to be different than they are. Consider what his days were like during these years on the frontier. He wakes before dawn in his military quarters. The camp is already stirring, soldiers preparing for the day's activities. His chest hurts. He has chronic respiratory problems, possibly asthma or some lung condition exacerbated by camp life. He possibly takes theriac, that ancient cure-all containing opium, to manage pain and help him sleep. The theriac helps. It also clouds his thinking, makes him slow and sluggish. He must balance pain management against mental clarity. He performs the morning rituals required of an emperor who is also high priest of Roman religion. He must maintain proper relations with the gods, or at least maintain the appearance of maintaining proper relations. Does he believe in Jupiter and Mars and the rest of the traditional pantheon? Probably not literally. Stoic philosophy understands divinity as universal reason, as the logos that governs all things. But public religion requires ritual, so Marcus performs it. He makes offerings, says prayers, consults auguries. It is part of duty. He meets with generals and tribunes, reviewing military dispositions, planning operations, adjudicating disputes among officers. Military men can be prideful, territorial, concerned with honor and precedence. Marcus must navigate their egos while making rational decisions about troop movements and campaign plans. He must listen to their advice because they understand warfare better than he does, while recognizing that military men tend toward aggressive solutions that might not be politically wise. He dictates letters to the Senate, to governors, to officials managing the parts of the empire he cannot currently attend to in person. The letters go out by courier, traveling the imperial postal system at speeds that seem impossibly slow to modern sensibilities, but are actually impressive for ancient technology. A letter from the Danube to Rome takes perhaps a week. A letter to the eastern provinces takes 3 weeks or more. He must make decisions and give orders knowing that conditions will change before his instructions arrive. He reviews intelligence reports about tribal movements beyond the frontier. Rome maintains networks of informants, traders, and scouts who venture beyond Roman territory and report back about Germanic politics and military preparations. The information is fragmentary, unreliable, essential. Marcus must make strategic decisions based on incomplete intelligence, must assess threats he cannot see directly. He makes decisions about supply chains, about moving legions from one sector to another, about whether to negotiate or attack. These are decisions that result in people dying. Stoic philosophy tells him that death is natural, that he should not fear it for himself or grieve excessively for others, but Stoicism does not tell him that killing is good, only that sometimes it is necessary. Marcus must live with that distinction. He must order attacks knowing that thousands will die, must balance military necessity against moral cost. In the afternoon, if circumstances allow, he might study. He has brought books, scrolls carried in protective cases, Greek philosophy and literature. He reads to maintain his connection to the intellectual life he values more than power. He corresponds with his old rhetoric teacher, Fronto, though the warmth of their earlier relationship has cooled. Fronto does not understand why Marcus spends so much energy on philosophy rather than cultivating his eloquence. Marcus no longer cares much about eloquence. Eloquence is performance. He cares about getting through the day with his character intact. In the evening, there are dinners with officers, social obligations that cannot be avoided even on campaign. Marcus must be present, must listen to military men tell war stories, must maintain the appearance of normalcy and camaraderie. These dinners are political events disguised as social ones. Officers compete for imperial favor, jockey for promotions, form alliances and rivalries. Marcus must navigate this while projecting authority and approachability, strength and kindness. It is exhausting. The meals are simple by imperial standards, but lavish by military ones. Roasted meat, bread, baked that morning, wine diluted with water as proper Romans drink it. The officers recline on couches, Roman style, even in a military camp. They maintain civilization's forms even at the edge of the known world. They tell stories about battles, about narrow escapes, about the strangeness of Germanic customs. They laugh too loudly, drink too much, try to forget that tomorrow some of them might die. Marcus participates minimally. He asks questions, shows interest, laughs at appropriate moments. But part of him is elsewhere, already thinking about the work waiting in his quarters, the philosophical texts he wants to read, the notes he wants to write. He is present in body but absent in spirit, performing the role of commander while his mind seeks escape in contemplation. Sometimes an officer will ask his opinion on philosophical matters, having heard of the emperor's devotion to Stoicism. Marcus answers briefly, clearly, without condescension. He does not lecture. He does not attempt to convert anyone to philosophy. He simply states what he believes and moves the conversation along. These men are soldiers, not philosophers. They need courage and discipline, not abstract arguments about virtue and indifferent things. Then he returns to his quarters. His staff prepares reports for his review, correspondence requiring his attention, decisions that can only be made by the emperor. He works through these, making notes, giving orders, signing documents. The bureaucracy of empire continues regardless of circumstances. There are always problems requiring imperial judgment, always situations where only the emperor's authority can resolve disputes or authorize actions. A governor in Gaul reports unrest among the local population. Marcus must decide whether to send additional troops or trust the governor to handle it locally. A dispute between two cities in Asia Minor over water rights requires imperial arbitration. A senator requests permission to marry his cousin, which requires special dispensation. A merchant guild petitions for tax relief due to plague losses. The requests are endless, the decisions required of him constant. Marcus handles each matter carefully, methodically. He reads the full reports.
considers precedents, thinks through implications. He does not rush. Hasty decisions made by emperors have consequences that echo for generations. He must be careful, deliberate, just, even when he is tired, especially when he is tired. And, late at night, when everyone else is asleep, when the camp is finally quiet except for guards at their posts and the distant sounds of the river, Marcus takes out his papyrus and writes, "Do not act as if you had 10,000 years to live. Death hangs over you. While you live, while it is in your power, be good." He writes this because today he wanted to be cruel to someone who frustrated him. He writes this because he is 54 years old and his body hurts and he is tired. He writes this because he has been emperor for 13 years and he will be emperor until he dies. And there is no escape except through death, which terrifies him despite everything philosophy says about mortality being natural. When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They are like this because they cannot tell good from evil. He writes this because tomorrow he will deal with officers who are meddling and ungrateful, with tribal negotiators who are dishonest, with courtiers who are jealous. He writes this not because he has transcended frustration, but because he needs to prepare himself to handle it, to remind himself that other people's behavior is not in his power, that he can control only his response. Concentrate every minute like a Roman, like a man, on doing what's in front of you with precise and genuine seriousness, tenderly, willingly, with justice. And on freeing yourself from all other distractions. He writes this because he is constantly distracted, constantly pulled in multiple directions, constantly tempted to worry about things he cannot control. He writes this to redirect his attention, to remind himself that the only thing that matters is this moment, this decision, this action. The meditations are the voice of a man trapped in a role he never wanted, using philosophy as the only tool he has to maintain his sanity and his virtue. They work barely, which means Marcus continues serving, continues making decisions, continues being emperor. But the cost is visible in every line. In 175 CE, something happens that suggests Marcus's grip is slipping, that the strain of 8 years of frontier warfare and plague is breaking something essential. While he is campaigning in the north, word reaches him that Avidius Cassius, the general who won the Parthian War, has revolted in the east. The news arrives by fast courier, a messenger riding the imperial postal system at maximum speed, changing horses at every station, covering the distance from Syria to the Danube in record time. The message is brief, horrifying. Cassius has declared himself emperor. He claims Marcus is dead, that news of the emperor's death has reached the east, that the empire needs leadership, and he is providing it. The claim is false. Marcus is very much alive, standing in his headquarters, reading this dispatch. But the claim has been effective. Egypt and Syria, the eastern provinces that Cassius governs or influences, have accepted his claim. They are minting coins with Cassius's face. They are taking oaths to him as emperor. For a brief period, Rome has two emperors, the actual one on the Danube and the usurper in the east. Marcus must respond. This is not a military threat in the conventional sense. Cassius is not bringing armies west to fight for the throne. He is claiming legitimacy, saying that Marcus is dead and that he is the legitimate successor. If Marcus does nothing, if he allows the eastern provinces to accept Cassius's claim, the empire will fracture. Other provinces might follow, governors might decide they have better claims than Cassius. The entire structure could collapse into civil war. This is a test of Marcus's philosophy. Cassius is a traitor by Roman law deserving of death. Treason is the highest crime, punishable not just by execution, but by destruction of the traitor's entire family, confiscation of property, damnatio memoriae, erasure from history. Every precedent says Marcus should respond with maximum severity, should make an example of Cassius that will deter future revolts. But Stoicism teaches forgiveness. It teaches that all humans are part of a universal brotherhood, that we are all rational beings capable of error, that we should not be angry even at wrongdoers because they act in ignorance. If someone does wrong, a Stoic should correct them if possible, endure them if not, but never respond with anger or cruelty. The wise man understands that wrongdoing comes from misunderstanding, that people who commit evil are harming themselves more than anyone else, that the appropriate response is pity rather than rage. Marcus wants to forgive Cassius. He says so publicly. He writes to the Senate announcing that he wishes he could have pardoned the man, reasoned with him, demonstrated that revolt was unnecessary. He says he would have shown Cassius that he was not angry, that he understood Cassius acted out of mistaken belief rather than malice. He frames the revolt as tragedy rather than crime, as error rather than evil. But Marcus never gets the chance to test his philosophical principles against political reality. Before he can march east, before he can confront Cassius or offer forgiveness, Cassius's own soldiers kill him. They have heard that Marcus is alive, that Cassius's claim was based on false information. Continuing to support Cassius means genuine treason, fighting against the legitimate emperor rather than supporting what they believed was proper succession. The soldiers do the calculation, decide Cassius is now a liability rather than an opportunity, and solve the problem themselves. They cut off Cassius's head and bring it to Marcus. It arrives in a box, preserved in some fashion, recognizable. The soldiers expect reward for their loyalty, for removing the traitor, for sparing the emperor the trouble of doing it himself. They have performed a service. They expect gratitude. Marcus refuses to look at it. When the box is presented to him, he turns away, orders it removed from his presence. He will not view it. He orders it buried without viewing it. A gesture of forgiveness or revulsion or both. He will not participate in desecration of the dead, will not allow Cassius to be further humiliated. The man is dead. That is enough. Then he writes to the Senate asking them not to execute Cassius's family or supporters, requesting clemency for men who betrayed him. This is extraordinary. Roman practice dictates harsh punishment for treason, not just for the principal, but for all connected to him. Cassius's family, his close supporters, anyone who benefited from the revolt, all should face execution or exile or confiscation. Marcus says no. He asks the Senate to spare them, to recognize that they acted on Cassius's orders or false information, that they do not deserve destruction for another man's crime. The Senate complies mostly. Cassius's closest supporters are executed because some punishment is politically necessary, but his family is spared, his children live, his property is not entirely confiscated. It is an extraordinary display of philosophical principle overriding political pragmatism. Marcus, trying to be the Stoic sage his philosophy describes, trying to forgive genuine betrayal. But something about the incident shakes him. The revolt happened because people believed he was dead. The belief was false, but it was plausible. Marcus is 54, chronically ill, commanding armies in harsh conditions, exposed to plague and battle and the constant stress of frontier warfare. He could die at any time. Cassius's revolt demonstrates that the empire's stability depends on Marcus's survival, but his survival is not guaranteed. He thinks about succession. He has a wife and children back in Rome. He has not seen Faustina in months, has not seen his children except for Commodus, who joined him on campaign. His son is 14 years old, almost the age Marcus was when Hadrian chose him. And Marcus begins to think about what happens if he dies before finishing the Germanic wars, before securing the frontier, before returning to Rome and establishing proper succession. The obvious choice, according to the system that created Marcus, would be adoption. He should choose a capable adult man, someone who has demonstrated virtue and administrative skill, someone who can step into the role immediately if Marcus dies. This is how Rome has selected emperors for a century. This is the system that works. But Marcus has a biological son. Commodus is his child, the one boy who survived from Faustina's many pregnancies. And Marcus begins to move toward a decision that will destroy everything. This is where the tragedy begins its final movement. Marcus has watched Rome prosper under the adoptive system, where emperors choose capable successors rather than relying on biology. His own path to power came through Hadrian's choice, mediated through Antoninus. The system works. It gives Rome competent rulers instead of genetic lottery winners. Every example confirms this. Every time Rome has relied on biological succession, the results have been mixed at best, catastrophic at worst. Caligula was Tiberius's biological heir. Nero was Claudius's adopted son, but chosen for family reasons rather than merit. The lesson is clear. Merit should trump blood, but Marcus also has Commodus, and Commodus is his child. The sources describe the boy as young, untested, reportedly interested more in gladiatorial games than governance. There are already concerns. People whisper that the boy is not serious, that he lacks his father's character, that he would be a poor emperor. But he is Marcus's son. In 176 CE, Marcus elevates Commodus to the rank of co-emperor. Commodus is 15 years old. It happens formally with Senate approval, with all the proper ceremonies, but everyone can see what this means. Marcus is establishing dynastic succession, naming his biological son as heir, despite the boy's youth and inexperience. It is a return to the principle of blood over merit, a rejection of the system that created Marcus himself. Why does Marcus do this? The sources do not tell us his reasoning. No ancient historian recorded Marcus explaining his decision. We are left to speculate, to project, to guess at motivations that might make sense of this seemingly catastrophic choice. Did he love his son too much to see his flaws? Did he believe Commodus would improve with responsibility, that the boy would rise to the occasion, that placing him in the role would force him to develop the necessary character? Did he fear that naming an adoptive heir would provoke Commodus's supporters into revolt, that the boy had enough backing among certain factions that passing him over would guarantee civil war? Did he simply not have anyone better? Looking at the available candidates, the capable generals and administrators who might have been chosen, did Marcus see flaws that we cannot see from our distance? Did he calculate that Commodus, for all his limitations, was still the least bad option? Or did he, exhausted after 15 years of war and plague, decide that his son's claim was legitimate and that philosophy should not override nature? Did he decide that a father's duty to his son was equal to an emperor's duty to the empire? Did he make a human choice rather than a philosophical one? We do not know. What we know is that this decision made by the philosopher-emperor who preached rationality and virtue will result in disaster. But Marcus will not live to see it. He has 4 more years. The war continues. The Germanic tribes are pushed back, contained, but not decisively defeated. Rome regains territory, establishes new fortifications, negotiates treaties with some tribes while fighting others. It is a grinding, unsatisfying conflict without clear victories or dramatic turning points, the kind of war that exhausts empires. Soldiers die in small engagements that history does not record. Civilians in border regions are killed or enslaved. Villages burn. Fields go unplanted. The human cost is enormous but dispersed. Individual tragedies rather than great catastrophes. Marcus remains on the frontier year after year, administering justice, managing logistics, writing in his notebook at night. He is aging visibly. The sources comment on it. He looks older than his years, worn down, moving with difficulty. The chronic respiratory problems worsen. He has less energy. But he continues, because continuing is his duty. In 178 CE, Commodus joins his father on campaign. He is 17, supposedly old enough to learn command, to observe how wars are fought and empires are governed. Marcus wants to teach him, wants to pass on the lessons that Antoninus taught, wants to prepare his son for the role he will inherit. But the sources suggest Commodus is bored, restless, eager to return to Rome and the entertainments waiting there. He does not like military camp life. He does not enjoy the tedious work of administration. He wants glory and excitement, dramatic victories and triumphs, not the grinding details of logistics and diplomacy. Marcus tries to teach him patience, tries to explain that effective rule is mostly unglamorous work, tries to show him that being emperor means serving rather than being served. But the boy who slept on the floor to practice Stoic virtue cannot connect with the young man who wants to fight animals in the arena. They are father and son. They share blood and household and dynastic destiny. They share nothing else. Marcus looks at Commodus and must see the failure of his choice, but it is too late to change course. Commodus is co-emperor. The succession is established. Marcus can only hope that time and responsibility will transform his son into something better than he currently is. Marcus's health deteriorates. The chronic pain worsens. The respiratory problems become more severe. He is 58 years old, ancient by Roman standards, worn out by years of travel and command and worry. He has spent nearly 2 decades at war, first against Parthia through Lucius, then against the Germanic tribes personally. He has managed an empire through plague that killed millions. He has held together a structure that should have collapsed under the accumulated pressures. And his body is giving out. In March 180, at a military camp, either Vindobona or Sirmium, depending on which source you trust, Marcus falls seriously ill. Perhaps it is the plague finally catching him after all these years. Perhaps it is simple pneumonia, his damaged lungs unable to fight infection. Perhaps it is exhaustion, his body simply unable to continue. Whatever the cause, he is dying. He knows it. His physicians know it. Everyone knows it. There is time to prepare, to set affairs in order, to say goodbye. This is not sudden death in battle or assassination. This is the slow failure of a worn-out body, giving Marcus days to contemplate what is coming. A philosopher who has spent decades thinking about death, writing about death, preparing for death, now faces it directly. The sources give various accounts of his final days. They are written decades later, based on reports and rumors shaped by each author's agenda. But certain details seem consistent. Marcus does not panic. He does not rage against his fate or beg the gods for more time. He has spent his entire life preparing for this moment, writing notes to himself about accepting mortality. Now he must demonstrate whether his philosophy works. Cassius Dio, writing decades later, says Marcus commended Commodus to the care of his friends and officers, asking them to help the boy become a worthy emperor. He reportedly told them not to pity him, but to pity Commodus, who would face challenges without proper preparation. He asked them to guide the young emperor, to protect him from bad influences, to teach him what Marcus had run out of time to teach. The Historia. Augusta, unreliable but vivid, claims Marcus covered his head with his cloak and waited for death like a philosopher accepting fate. This may be literary invention, the kind of detail ancient biographers added to make deaths more dramatic. But it fits Marcus's character, or at least the character we see in the Meditations, someone trying to face the end with equanimity,
trying to practice what he has preached, trying to be good until the final moment. What actually happened in that tent or room, what Marcus said or thought or felt in his last hours, we cannot know for certain. We can imagine based on what he wrote, based on the philosophy he practiced. Perhaps he reviewed his life, considering whether he had fulfilled his duties, whether he had maintained his character, whether the effort had been worth it. Perhaps he thought about Antoninus, about being reunited with his adoptive father, if he believed in an afterlife, which Stoic philosophy does not really support, but which might offer comfort anyway. Perhaps he thought about Commodus, about his son taking power, about what would happen to Rome under the boy's rule. Did he have doubts? Did he wonder if his choice was wrong? Did he wish he had chosen differently? Or did he maintain conviction that his son would rise to the occasion, that blood mattered more than demonstrated character? Or perhaps he thought about nothing philosophical at all. Perhaps he was simply in pain, struggling to breathe, wanting it to be over. Philosophy is easier in health than in dying. Marcus spent his life trying to practice Stoic principles. But in the end, he was human, and humans die hard. But we know that on March 17th, 180 CE, Marcus Aurelius dies. The Emperor of Rome, philosopher-king, author of the Meditations, dies in a military camp on the frontier, far from Rome, far from home, far from the life he wanted. His last words, according to one source, are instructions to the officer of the guard about the day's military dispositions. Even dying, he is attending to duty. His body is cremated on the frontier, though the sources differ on whether this happens immediately or after transport to Rome. The funeral is conducted with full imperial honours, the body laid on a pyre with aromatic woods, oil poured over the wood, the fire lit. As the flames consume the body, an eagle is released, symbolizing the emperor's soul ascending to join the gods. It is ancient ritual, performed because ritual is required, regardless of what anyone believes about souls or gods, or what happens after death. His ashes are collected from the cooled pyre, placed in an urn, transported to Rome. They are interred in the mausoleum of Hadrian, that massive circular tomb where Rome's emperors rest. The Senate deifies him immediately, declaring him a god, adding him to the official pantheon. The mourning is reportedly unprecedented. Rome has lost not just an emperor, but a good man, a philosopher, someone who tried to rule with wisdom. The city grieves, and Commodus becomes sole emperor. Within months, Commodus abandons the frontier war his father spent 12 years fighting. He negotiates peace with the Germanic tribes, accepting terms that are humiliating by Roman standards. He returns to Rome, leaving the frontier fortifications unfinished, the tribal threats unresolved. The military commanders are horrified. 12 years of warfare, thousands of Roman lives, enormous treasure, all for a peace that gives Rome nothing it could not have negotiated before the war began. But Commodus wants to be in Rome. He wants the palace, the entertainments, the power, without the responsibility. He begins a reign that will spiral into madness and megalomania. He declares himself Hercules reborn, wears lion skins, carries a club. He fights in gladiatorial games in the Colosseum, killing animals and occasionally humans, degrading the imperial office in ways that horrify the Senate and people. He renames Rome after himself, calling it Colonia Commodiana. He orders senators executed on whims. He empowers favorites who are corrupt and incompetent. He is everything Marcus feared and everything Marcus failed to prevent. The Senate despises him. The people are horrified. The empire Marcus held together through will and philosophy begins to fracture. Provinces become restless. The frontiers grow unstable. The administration becomes corrupt. And in 192, CE 12 years after Marcus's death, Commodus is assassinated. His own bodyguard strangles him in his bath, ending his reign and demonstrating that even emperors are mortal. The year of the 5 emperors follows. Civil war, multiple claimants to the throne, each backed by different legions fighting for supremacy. The Praetorian Guard auctions the throne to the highest bidder. Legions march on Rome. The stability that Marcus maintained through constant effort collapses completely. The Pax Romana, the Roman peace that has lasted for 2 centuries, is over. Rome will recover. We'll have capable emperors again, will last another 200 years in the west and 1200 in the east. But the crisis Marcus held off has arrived, and it is as bad as he feared. This is Marcus Aurelius's legacy in the immediate term. He broke the adoptive system, chose his biological son, and the son destroyed everything his father worked for. It is impossible to avoid the question, how could the philosopher-emperor, the man who wrote about virtue and duty and rational choice, make such a catastrophic mistake? How could someone so intelligent fail to see what everyone else apparently saw, that Commodus was unfit to rule? The answer might be that Marcus was human. That philosophy, no matter how rigorously practiced, does not exempt you from love or hope or self-deception. That a man who spent his entire life doing his duty, suppressing his own preferences, accepting every burden placed upon him, might have one thing he could not bring himself to sacrifice: his son. Or perhaps Marcus saw exactly what he was doing and chose it anyway, deciding that his son's claim was legitimate regardless of capability, that blood mattered more than merit, that a father's obligation to his child trumped an emperor's obligation to the empire. If that was his reasoning, it contradicts everything he wrote about rationality and virtue and focusing on what leads to good outcomes rather than what feels right emotionally. But humans are contradictory. Perhaps Marcus's greatest contradiction was his final choice, or perhaps he was simply too exhausted to care. After 20 years of war, of plague, of holding the empire together through disasters he could not prevent, perhaps Marcus looked at his son and thought, "You deal with it, I am done." It would not be philosophical, it would be profoundly human, and Marcus, despite the legend, was always more human than sage. But there is another legacy, one Marcus never intended. Somewhere among his possessions when he died, probably transported back to Rome with his other belongings, were notebooks, personal notes written in Greek, repetitive, philosophical reminders, quotations from Epictetus and other teachers, observations about people and death and duty. No one knows how they survived. Did someone in Marcus's household recognize their value and preserve them deliberately? Did they survive by accident, tucked in with official documents, discovered later and recognized as unusual? Did they pass through multiple hands, copied and recopied, their origins gradually forgotten until only the text remained? We do not know. The manuscript history is obscure. The first certain reference to their existence dates to the 10th century, 700 years after Marcus's death. By then they were circulating among Byzantine intellectuals who recognized their value. The notebooks had no title. Marcus never named them because he never intended anyone to read them. Later copyists called them various things. To himself, things to himself, the self-writings, Marcus Antoninus's own thoughts. Eventually, English translators, probably influenced by the popularity of meditation as a contemplative practice, settled on Meditations. The title is almost certainly wrong. Meditation implies structured contemplation, something deliberate and public and polished. These are private notes, stream of consciousness reminders, working documents, the philosophical equivalent of a journal or commonplace book. But Meditations is the name that stuck. and under that name the text entered Western philosophy. The book is unlike anything else in ancient literature. We have philosophical treatises, systematic arguments about ethics and physics and logic. We have dialogues, polished works meant to teach through conversation. We have letters written for specific recipients, but often with publication in mind, meant to be circulated and read by others. We have histories and biographies, accounts of others' lives written by observers. But we do not have anything else like the meditations, the completely private, unstructured, repetitive thoughts of a historical figure preserved by accident, revealing the gap between public image and private struggle. We do not have Caesar's diary or Augustus's personal notes. We have their public writings, their official accounts, carefully crafted for posterity. Marcus's notebooks are different. They are what he said to himself when no one was listening. They are accidentally honest. The meditations show us someone trying to be good. Not someone who has achieved goodness and is explaining how, but someone in the middle of the attempt, documenting his failures and renewed efforts. Marcus reminds himself about the same things over and over because he keeps forgetting them. He writes about accepting death because he fears it. He writes about not being angry because he gets angry constantly. He writes about the indifference of externals because he cares deeply about external circumstances and wishes he did not. This raw honesty is what makes the text so powerful. It is not inspiring in the conventional sense. It is not saying that if you follow these steps you will achieve peace and success and tranquility. It is saying that living according to philosophy is hard, that you will fail repeatedly, that the gap between knowing what is right and doing what is right is vast, and that the only response is to keep trying. The meditations are not a solution. They are documentation of struggle, and human beings across 2 millennia respond to that because we recognize our own struggles in them. The text influenced emperors and generals, Jesuits and philosophers. Frederick the Great carried a copy with him on military campaigns. John Stuart Mill praised it as ethical teaching at its highest. Matthew Arnold called it the highest ethical product of the ancient mind. In the 20th century, it influenced the development of cognitive behavioral therapy, whose founders acknowledged Stoic influence, particularly the idea that you cannot control events but can control your response to them, that thoughts shape emotions and behaviors. When people quote meditations today, in corporate boardrooms and self-help books and social media posts, whether they know it or not, they are quoting a man sitting in a military tent, exhausted and frightened, trying to convince himself that his philosophy works. They are quoting someone who was barely holding on, using written reminders to get through another day of duties he never wanted. But here is what strikes me most forcefully about Marcus Aurelius. He was the most powerful man in the world, and he could not make the world better. He ruled an empire that stretched across continents, commanded armies numbering in the hundreds of thousands, appointed governors and judges and generals, made law with his word, and he spent 20 years watching plague kill millions, watching barbarians invade, watching the structure he inherited crack under pressures he could not relieve. He did everything he could. He stayed on the frontier when he could have remained in Rome. He commanded personally when he could have delegated. He reformed what could be reformed, maintained what could be maintained, held things together through sheer will. And it was not enough. The empire survived him, but only temporarily. The stability ended, the crisis came, everything he worked for fell apart within a generation of his death. The meditations are the record of someone who knows this is happening, but continues serving anyway. Marcus could have abdicated. Emperors had done it before. Diocletian would do it a century later, retiring to grow cabbages, finding peace in ordinary life after decades of power. Marcus could have named someone else to handle the wars while he retired to study philosophy. He could have chosen peace for himself. personal tranquility, the life he actually wanted. Instead, he stayed at his post, making decisions, commanding armies, doing his duty until death, not because it would succeed, but because it was his duty, not because he believed he could save the empire, but because trying to save it was what his position required. This is Stoicism at its most austere and most noble, doing what is right regardless of outcome, maintaining virtue regardless of external results, serving because service is demanded even when service achieves nothing permanent. There is something profoundly moving and profoundly tragic about this. Marcus achieved nothing permanent. His military victories were temporary. The Germanic tribes returned after his death. His legal reforms were minor. History barely records them. His son destroyed his work. The succession was catastrophic. The empire he tried to preserve collapsed within a generation. If we judge Marcus by results, by whether he accomplished his goals, by whether the world was better because of his efforts, he failed. But if we judge him by whether he maintained his character while trying, whether he acted virtuously regardless of outcome, whether he continued serving despite knowing it was futile, he succeeded absolutely. He demonstrated that virtue is its own reward, not because it produces good results, but because it is the only thing entirely in our power. He demonstrated that philosophy is not about achieving tranquility, but about maintaining effort. That wisdom is not the absence of struggle, but the refusal to surrender to it. This is the Stoic paradox at its starkest. External events are indifferent. Only virtue matters. You cannot control outcomes, only your choices. Marcus lived this philosophy completely, which meant accepting that his life's work might accomplish nothing while still devoting everything to it. He could have despaired. The Meditations show us that sometimes he came close, that he wrote about overcoming despair precisely because despair threatened him, but he never stopped. He wrote his reminders and put on his armor and rode out to inspect the fortifications and made decisions that needed making. He did this because it was his duty, and duty was the only thing he could control. The emperor, who wrote only for himself, has been read by millions. The private notebooks meant for an audience of one have outlasted the empire they document, outlasted the city they were written to preserve, outlasted the gods they occasionally reference. Marcus tried to be good in a world that punished goodness, tried to be rational in circumstances that defied reason, tried to accept fate while fighting against it. He failed constantly at all of these. He succeeded in continuing to try. 2,000 years later, we read his desperate midnight notes and recognize ourselves, recognize the universal human condition of knowing what you should do and struggling to do it, of having principles and failing to live up to them, of being tired and frightened and unsure, but continuing anyway because that is what being human requires. We read about an emperor with absolute power who felt powerless, about a philosopher who could not convince himself his philosophy worked, about a father who made catastrophic choices out of love, about a man who did his duty until death and died knowing his work would not survive him. Marcus Aurelius was not a sage. He was not transcendent or serene or beyond human weakness. He was not even an especially successful emperor by conventional measures. He was a man who inherited an impossible job, did his best despite wanting desperately to do something else, made catastrophic mistakes, and died without seeing peace or victory or any evidence that his sacrifices mattered. But in that military tent along the frozen Danube, writing words meant only for himself. He achieved something rarer than success. He achieved honesty. He showed us what philosophy looks like when it is practiced by someone who needs it, not someone who has mastered it. He showed us that virtue is not a destination but a direction, that wisdom is not certainty but persistent questioning, that the good life is not the absence of struggle, but the refusal to surrender to it. The plague killed millions, the wars never ended, the barbarians kept coming, the empire fell. But the man who wrote you have power over your mind, not outside events, in a moment of exhaustion and fear, left us something that has survived everything else. Not answers, not solutions, not reassurance that everything will be fine if we just try hard enough. Just the record of someone trying, failing, and trying again. Just the voice of someone who was given everything the world could offer and discovered it was not enough, that the only sufficiency is internal, that peace cannot be granted by circumstances, but must be constructed thought by thought, choice by choice, day by day. Marcus Aurelius spent his life preparing for a job he never wanted, executed that job with integrity despite personal cost, failed to preserve what he was supposed to preserve, and died on a frontier far from home. And in dying, left us a book that teaches nothing except the most important lesson, that being human means struggling with exactly these contradictions, that greatness is not transcending the struggle but enduring it. That philosophy is not about becoming invulnerable, but about remaining vulnerable and choosing virtue anyway. 2,000 years from now, if humanity still exists, if books still survive, someone will read these notes from a Roman emperor and understand what it means to be trapped by duty, exhausted by trying, afraid of failing, and determined to continue anyway. They will recognize themselves in Marcus's struggle. They will see that their own midnight doubts, their own failures to live up to their principles, their own exhaustion at trying to be good in a world that makes goodness difficult, are not unique failures, but universal human experiences. The lamp flickers in the military tent. The oil is running low. Outside, the sentries walk their rounds, calling the watch, maintaining the perimeter. In the darkness beyond the fortifications, the Danube flows south toward the sea, indifferent to empires and emperors, indifferent to philosophy and virtue, indifferent to everything except gravity and the eternal movement of water toward lower ground. And Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, puts down his pen and prepares for another day of war. Tomorrow he will rise before dawn. He will put on his armor, heavy and cold. He will ride out with his officers to inspect the fortifications, to review the troops, to perform the duties of command. He will make decisions about logistics and strategy. He will adjudicate disputes. He will maintain the structure. He will do his duty. And tomorrow night, if he survives the day, if no Germanic spear finds him, if no plague fever takes him, if his exhausted body continues functioning for one more day, he will return to his tent and take out his papyrus and write again. He will write the same reminders, the same lessons, the same desperate notes to himself about accepting what cannot be changed and changing what can be, about focusing on virtue and releasing attachment to outcomes, about being good while he lives, because being good is all that is in his power. He will write because writing is how he survives, because putting philosophical principles into words makes them real, makes them present, gives him something to hold on to when everything else is falling apart, because he is human, and humans need reminders, need practice, need to return again and again to basic truths that are easy to forget and hard to live by. And 2,000 years later, we will read what he wrote and understand. We will recognize our own struggles in his. We will see that the gap between knowing and doing, between principle and practice, between philosophical ideal and lived reality, is not something we can eliminate, but something we must navigate every day. We will learn that philosophy is not about achieving some final state of perfection, but about continuing to practice, continuing to try, continuing to choose virtue even when virtue does not produce the outcomes we want. Marcus Aurelius's greatest achievement was not being emperor. It was being human while being emperor, being vulnerable while being powerful, being honest about struggle while maintaining effort. He left us not a manual for success, but a record of honest failure, not reassurance, but recognition. And in doing so, he gave us something more valuable than solutions. He gave us permission to struggle, to fail, to keep trying anyway, and to know that in trying we are not alone.